Our third speaker today is Chris Delgado. Chris is a consultant supporting the Africa Ag Policy Unit of the World Bank. He also maintains appointments as a senior fellow at the World Resources Institute and is adjunct faculty at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. His career it spans several years and several different responsibilities in the livestock area. But one thing that I thought was very interesting in Chris's bio was that in 1999 paper he coined the term livestock revolution. So we're happy to have Chris here as well.
Well, thanks. The first two discussants have really talked about very practical things to do, and they're important. They're big things. I think John McDermott, who will follow me, will do something similar but in developing countries. I'm going to try to provide a transition to talk about just a few facts. I have 5 minutes. I'm going to put up some facts. Some of them are quite inconvenient, and they're quite important to focus on, and we can talk during the discussion period about what they might mean or not mean. That picture is in Ethiopia, by the way, and the stuff on the right of the picture is what cattle do, and on the left, if you build a fence and you keep them out and people don't make any income from them, vegetation grows quickly. This is the primary inconvenient fact. It compares 1982 to 84 for meat and for milk. You see the milk is the orange. And you can see that the developed countries completely dominated certainly the milk business and also the meat business as recently as the early 80s. But the developing countries are where the action is, and that's going to continue for some time. So when you're talking, whether you're talking about environmental pressures or economic, where prices are set or so forth, it's in the developing countries. And the bottom line is to meet demand in 2050, we think the world is going to effectively demand, and this is not some government, this is billions of consumers are going to independently demand 90% more meat, 70% more calories, 80% more milk, and that's going to be predominantly, almost entirely in developing countries. Now let's talk about emissions, since I'm supposed to cover the environmental part. Shenggen used the figure 17% of all greenhouse gases come from livestock. Well, it's actually 7% directly, and it's primarily ruminants. 80% of that is ruminants or more. Now, where manure goes and manure management, you can get it up to 7% directly. Now, how much beyond 7% depends on the indirect, some of the post-harvest value chains, or through if you're cutting down forest, as you were in the 1980s in Central America, to pasture livestock, you could count that as a livestock emission, or you're cutting down cerrado to grow livestock feed. But there's no way you really get past 14, and I doubt you get to 14 today when deforestation is primarily pushed by palm oil and things like that. Now beef really is the emitter, and this is just data that shows that beef production per unit of protein really generates a lot more greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, that's why beef always gets picked on. But Pierre Gerber, who's here in the audience, I see, is actually the fellow who put this together. And it really makes an important point that even for beef, if you go across different zones, you get a tremendous variation, because if you're talking about emissions not per animal but per unit of output, and you're very efficient in output, you really can cut emissions per kilo of beef tremendously. So in other words, that's saying that if you're in the emissions cutting business, you can actually do a lot in livestock. The problem is the farmers get rewarded for it. I just have 2 slides left in my remaining time. This is from the Los Plateau, which is 4 provinces of China, a little bit of Inner Mongolia, and it's about 450 kilometers, I guess, Shenggen to the west of Beijing, where it starts. It's been farmed for 5,000 years, and this is what it looked like in 1990. That's primarily, I mean, there's lots of reasons for that, but free-ranging goats had a lot to do with it, since we're talking about livestock. That has completely transformed into a garden, almost. nowadays. That you see the 2012 picture. I'm not saying all of Los Plateaux looks like that, but most of it does. And basically, it started out as a water rehabilitation project, and free-range goats were confined and put away, and the World Bank was involved in this with the Chinese government, and the idea was that it would be very nice to have people grow fruit. Fruit was non-controversial. The fruit never really made it. It sort of made it, but not much. But the farmers said, hey, we've got all this biomass around now through this project. Why don't we have confined dairy cattle, which they did, and why don't we have Kashmiri sheep, which they did. And that's where all their income, they doubled their incomes from that. And it turned out it's in the World Bank books, it's one of the most successful livestock projects in the bank, and livestock was an afterthought that came because the farmers asked for it. My point from that, just to end, my time's up, is that in fact livestock is critical to adaptation to climate change because it's a movable asset, and it can be critical to sequestration. It's certainly critical to dealing with the really major problem in the world in agriculture, which is the degradation of the agricultural resource base, which can be caused by livestock, but can also be remedied by it. It depends how you do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. You shocked me. You got through all of those slides in that time. Thank you.